The Atlanta Story is a podcast highlighting Atlanta's most interesting careers, entrepreneurs, and builders. I'm JC Lucas with Atlanta Ventures and co-producer alongside Jon Birdsong. In today's episode, Jon sits down with Joe Rogers, chairman of Waffle House. In 1979, Joe brokered a deal earning him and the Rogers family controlling interest of the steadily growing Waffle House franchise. Under his leadership, Waffle House grew to over 1,900 restaurants while employing over 35,000 people. In the interview, Joe discusses how Waffle House navigated the COVID crisis, the values that make Waffle House so unique, why most of the restaurants are located in the Southeast, and much more. We hope you enjoy the show and subscribe to The Atlanta Story.
Joe Rogers, thank you so much for joining us on the Atlanta Story podcast this afternoon.
Glad to do it.
A lot to talk about today. It right now is May 2021. We're 15 months into this pandemic. When was the moment that you knew that what this pandemic was going to bring us was something that we'd never seen before?
Well, there were a couple of moments. One, from a disease standpoint, you could really see that in late 19 because of what was happening in China and some other places before they shut down international travel, which was a day late and a dollar short, obviously. But as I told someone, the virus was in the mail. It had already been shipped, and it was highly contagious. They just weren't sure who the most vulnerable targets were. They had a good guess, but they weren't sure. When I saw the government start taking the reactions it did, with no open discussion of a defined national mission, I said, uh-oh, things could get really crazy here.
And was that December of 19, or when were you making that decision?
November, December, you could see it coming and you needed to prepare, but it was really January, February when we started stress testing for what might happen if sales fell off the cliff in the restaurants.
Right.
And you experience government imposed or just a panic among people and them staying home. As it turned out, it was a government panic, not a population panic.
Interesting. So that was one moment. When was another moment that you knew that this was going to be different, maybe due to the population panic?
Well, when the government, I think the vice president had his little sign, 15 days, and then there was 30 days. He thought, wait a minute, these are supposed to be the most powerful people on the face of the earth, and they can't figure out what they're doing. You could tell what was ahead of us was not order. It was going to be somewhat chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And then other politicians started getting on board. And
how did you manage that message to your thousands of employees and help them manage the government panic that was happening?
Well, the good news is I didn't have to manage the message. I shared the message with Walt Amer, our CEO, my son Joe, and my daughter Lee and others that were there at the company really running the business at the time,
mm-hmm.
and still do to this day, obviously. But I had just recently had back surgeries and was trying to go rehab my back and was in no condition to be out leading a parade of anything. But
staying abreast of what was going on.
Behind the scenes, it was helpful that they had a voice of experience in terms of how to react to this. Given that we weren't in control.
Right.
We didn't have control. We could have valiantly protested and said, you can't do that. You can't shut us down. But we'd have had a mess on our hands.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like the irony here is the government looks at the Waffle House organization as a litmus test of what's appropriate and what's not when it comes to national hurricanes and all sorts of disasters.
Well, remember, those are things that happen somewhere. We're used to crisis response when something happens somewhere, no matter how severe it is. because we can draw on the rest of the system to rush in there and help deal with the issue. And that's what we do. We just show up. We're not sure what we're going to do till we get there, but we show up and start figuring it out. In this case, this something, the virus, and really that was the government-imposed restrictions, happened everywhere in fairly short order. Sooner in some states, others in others. But when the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, shut down the whole state, basically, I thought, no, wait a minute. I've been to Ohio a lot of times. Cincinnati and Columbus are not like Lima and Sydney, Ohio. Big town, small town, rural, urban. What are they doing? But that's the way governments think about doing things. One size fits all. We're not a nation of one size fits all. And that was the government overreach that happened. I've yet to find anybody that can tell me to this day what was the defined national mission, albeit evolving as time goes, and you learn more, which you always do in a crisis. What was the defined national mission? I don't see you speaking up real quick.
Yeah, if anything, it would have been just get through it, and get through what, But so looking back, what are some of the things that you would tell the next generation of leaders that's leading any business on how to get through a pandemic?
Well, the crisis leadership checklist hadn't changed in years and years and years. You start off not knowing everything. You learn as you go, but you've got to be totally transparent with the people. You got to be totally authentic, totally honest. Good news, bad news, you give it all to them, tell them what you know and don't know, and you've got to make decisions. Shutting everything down was huge overreach. When the history books are written, and articles are being written now by some pretty interesting people looking back at past comparisons, and you're probably going to realize we could have gotten through this pandemic with about the same outcomes at, call it 1/3 the economic toll, 1/3 of the social toll, approximately the same number, unfortunately, of COVID-related deaths, more or less infections. But instead, we ended up with a mess on our hands. And tell me what the scientific sense is between Disney World reopening in the middle of 2020 and Disneyland just now reopening.
Yeah, this week, right?
Makes no sense whatsoever. And yet that's the government overreach that happened. I'm all for protecting people.
Yep.
But public health is like the numbers on a clock face. There's risk in every direction. And there's an old Waffle House proverb, don't let one crisis become 2 or 3 or 4. And how many did we end up having this time? We had a COVID crisis. We decided we would have an economic crisis. That one was man-made. We decided we'd have an education crisis. That was man-made. We decided we would have possibly a national mental health crisis, and you're seeing more and more signs of that. A relationship crisis among people because their worlds got upended.
Drug and alcohol.
Yes.
Addiction.
And go look at the individual stories, not as they lump the data all together. If your small business basically got ripped apart and is out of business, thank you very much, government, for all the economic help you gave, but you just destroyed my dream. So why is the government doing that? And it goes to show you the inexperience. Government leaders, have you ever noticed that many of our government leaders always have answers as opposed to saying, let me find out who has a good answer to that.
And let me listen more.
They're the ones who should be searching for knowledge, judgment, and wisdom, as opposed to pretending they have all the knowledge, judgment, wisdom. Some of our political leaders did reach out.
Right.
And ask for experience and advice from others. And that's what good leaders do.
So from a numbers perspective, can you share just, January 2020 and then, May 2021, what how many stores did y'all close? Is everything back up and running now? Where is the state of the Waffle House right now?
Well, we went from, if March 1, we were running at 100% of reality. 3 or 4 weeks later, we were at 20% of financial reality.
Wow.
And that was a combination of shutting down not quite half the stores, keeping 400, give or take, open 24 hours, and the rest were partial hours, limping along, trying to break even. And the whole idea was you burn cash. That's when you're cash flow negative. You don't do anything when you're cash flow neutral. And you build cash when you're cash flow positive. We had to get to a neutral cash position because you just can't keep burning cash. You run out of money, you're out of money. I heard people talking about, well, liquidity. That's borrowed money. Mm-hmm. And I heard some talk about, let's borrow money. What are we going to do with it? Oh, you mean absorb operating losses. When are those going to end? And nobody knew. See, that's the problem going in. If you don't know when you're going to come out, you don't borrow money unless you understand the game you're playing. And going into this thing, what if we had been based in California? I think 20-25% of our restaurants are in Georgia. Mm-hmm. Georgia was one of the first states to turn around and emerge. Another high percentage are based in Florida. What if we'd been based in California?
Yeah, you can only imagine the conversations that In-N-Out and some of those chains are probably having now, right?
Well, Denny's has probably got 25% of their restaurants based in California. And what happened? They were shut down for inside dining. If we'd been in that scenario, what a mess. We'd have been far worse off. But today, well, prior to stimulus checks going out, we were probably back to 94% of what you would think of as normal. When stimulus checks hit, all of a sudden we went to 115%. But that was customers coming through the front door. The problem was employment fell off. So here's the government at work again, trying to stimulate the economy, but basically handing people stimulus money and supplemental unemployment benefits to not work.
We were talking about that today in the Atlanta Ventures weekly meeting on employment. It's very difficult to hire right now. Are y'all seeing that at the Waffle House?
Very difficult to hire. You first want to try to get your past workforce back. That's your best chance, and we're kind of running out of steam there. Very difficult to hire new people. The ongoing unemployment benefits, the continuing things about child care supplements. I think there's going to be a food supplement program this summer. All of these things are going to get in the way. But once again, it's because the government makes these global or macroeconomic assumptions about people that is
one size fits all.
Yeah, it's not the way the world works on the streets.
Well, let's talk about the early days of the Waffle House. And it was, your father started it when you were about 8 years old, is that right?
Yes, my father and his partner, Tom Fortner.
Yes. So what was it like growing up in the food industry, and talk to us about some of the early moments of just living in the family that had built the Waffle House?
Well, in the 50s, as a child, I was really more familiar with what was going on in a chain called the Tuttle House, which is where my father worked. It was based out of Memphis, Tennessee. And in the 50s, I grew up in Atlanta and Memphis. In the 60s, as the Waffle House really got going, that's when Joe Sr. made the switch, and he and Tom decided to grow this thing. And that's when I started work back in the early 60s out in DeKalb County at the original restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
We had 4 small restaurants in 1961. And I worked starting when I was 14 years old. And throughout high school I worked, and then throughout college. And by 1968, I was out of college and off to the Air Force for a year, and then off to business school, and then back to work full time. So the 60s was an emerging decade for the Waffle House. We were adding company restaurants, not too many. My dad and Tom thought if we ever got 25 restaurants, we'd have a good lifestyle. We could hunt, fish, play golf, all the things they wanted to do. My dad had a very busy career, on the road a lot. He covered 9 southeastern states for the Tuttle House in a stick-shift Chevrolet, flying occasionally, driving a lot. So he was on the road and worked quite a bit, and he was ready for a different lifestyle. But they stumbled into franchising back in the mid-'60s, and that sort of took off on its own.
So let's talk about that, right? The goal when your father and Tom joined together was let's get it to where we can just have a business of 25 restaurants and give us the freedom to enjoy some of the more fun things in life. When did y'all know it was going to be something that was today in the thousands of restaurants? Was it just something that, hey, let's just keep rinsing and repeating, or how did it grow to be so big today?
Well, they had no ambitions like that.
Wow.
And I took over operating the business in 1973, but I didn't gain ownership control of it until 1978. And none of that was planned. That just happened.
Okay.
None of that was planned. So there was no long-term destination when we had all these other families involved. And then suddenly it was me, and I was not a family. It was just me.
Right.
And but we had other owners because we'd been sharing the ownership with the people that worked there. But I gained ownership control in 1978, and for the next year or two after that, I said, oh, wait a minute. What do I want to do? What's the future going to look like?
Right.
And it wasn't really until the late 70s, early 80s, any decision was made to try to make this into an enduring business. We thought we had an enduring concept,
sure.
Food service, calories. Y'all haven't been able to do calories over the internet yet. I know this is the Atlanta Tech Village, and you think everything can be solved through technology.
Oh, I don't know about that, but
good luck. But
well, when you talk about ownership, so what'd you do? Did you go to the bank and get a bunch of debt, and how did you get the ownership? No. That was a joke from our previous conversation.
Yeah, it was lots of circumstances led up to really my dad and his partner realizing they needed to sort out their financial affairs. So basically, it was seller financed, and we were able to work that out. And we were a highly leveraged company now, back in the 60s. If all your restaurants are leased, that's like having a mortgage. You owe the money.
Right.
So leases are debt, but they didn't start capitalizing leases on balance sheets until recent years. I started doing it at the Waffle House back in the 1970s.
Yep.
To the chagrin of our auditors, who would argue with me.
When did y'all start buying the real estate that Waffle Houses are on? When did that kind of click?
After I gained ownership control in 1978, and we were going through what I thought could lead to a depression in the country, which is where I came up with the template we used during the pandemic recently. I decided it was time to deleverage the company and started working from that point forward to get out of existing debt and take on no more debt and buy real estate rather than lease real estate and just go slow. Everybody was in a hurry. We changed our mindset coming out of the 70s. We had an 18% compounded annual growth rate in number of stores from 1960 to 1980. Maybe it's been 3 or 4% since then. Why be in a hurry? Once we slowed it down, we got big.
You just talked about a checklist during the pandemic. Can you elaborate more on that?
On the crisis leadership pandemic? Well, the first thing you got to do in a crisis is show up and look it square in the face and say, what is it?
Okay.
You got to, it's a hurricane, you can't do it from afar. You got to get face to face with it and see what needs to be done. And you got to share that reality with everybody that's involved.
And you're looking at this in every, whether it's Ohio, whether it's Florida, y'all are looking at this every day, especially with hurricanes coming down and in a few months, right? I mean, that's hurricane season and down in Florida. I lived through 3 of them, and I can only imagine the monitoring that goes on.
Well, you do as much as you can beforehand, but really a lot of our whole response protocol has been built in their responding.
Yeah,
it's not like you pre-plan it.
Yep.
You flood resources in there and you show up and you do what you can do.
Yep.
Because you don't know what you're going to encounter.
Back to that earlier checklist that you were talking about. And we're going to take a quick break here and share that this podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. If you are looking to start the next $300 million business out of Atlanta, check out the studio at atlantaventures.com. I'd love to talk about the culture of the Waffle House, because it is one of the cultures that is universal to everyone and anyone of just come in, enjoy your time, and it's open, accessible, approachable. How did y'all set the culture so early in the Waffle House and to what it is today, which I think is one of the best cultures in all of business?
Well, the first thing I got told when I went to work as a waiter in 1961, and we had 15 seats in the restaurant, and you could see the front door and everybody that walked in it. And my dad said, son, you want to greet every customer that comes in that door. Come in, please. Come in, please. And make it a welcoming environment. And he said, all of us need to do that. All of us. And so while we're a large business today, we're not a big business. We have a couple thousand almost small businesses that need to operate like a small business. So every one of those needs to be basically a welcome center for customers. And it needs to be a fulfilling place to work for the associates. We all work side by side. We wear the same uniforms. The younger generation wears more hip uniforms than I do. We all wear the name tags, and we all do all the jobs. I've been in there washing dishes and looked up and seen friends of mine at the high counter that get worried that something's wrong with the business. And they asked me, what's wrong? I said, well, nothing. Everything's great. We're busy. But they wonder why I'm doing that. What else am I going to do if I'm in the restaurant? There's no computer I need to go sit down and operate. There's no telephone I need to go get on. If I'm not waiting on customers or helping servers or cooks or calling out the orders or cleaning the parking lot, I'm going to look kind of silly.
Yeah.
Standing around there.
I feel like there's some more Waffle House, you said isms or sayings. The one was don't turn one crisis into another. Is there any others?
That's a proverb.
Proverb. Yes, a Waffle House proverb. Are there any others you can share just around the culture of the Waffle House?
Oh, we've got a certain set of rules. We write them down on simple checklists. About rule 1 is show up. Decision 1 is how to show up. Sometimes you show up guns a-blazing. Sometimes you show up hugging and welcoming everybody. It just depends on the situation. I'm reminded of when in Hurricane Katrina, the first FEMA response didn't work out so well. And the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, recognized that. And a couple of weeks later, they sent in this general from down here at Fort Gillem, I think, Russell Honore. In fact, I saw him recently, something going on with the COVID crisis. And they called him a raging Cajun He was from down there and said he got off the helicopter and started cussing and yelling and things started happening. And sometimes that's what you got to do. But you do it on the ground there. Our business is all about people and showing up and dealing with people.
I feel like that's even in the software world too, despite many just reputations. Let's continue to talk about the Waffle House playbook, and because I feel like that is so. When you say it's about showing up and people, what can the larger audience who's not in hospitality learn about the Waffle House playbook and bring it to their businesses, right? From whether it's the core values or whether it's showing up, it's how you show up, right? What are some of the things to all the CEOs and leaders that are listening today?
Well, running a single restaurant is not that complicated. You do it in your kitchen at home. You can cook eggs and bacon. We just have to do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we have to staff appropriately, which means we got to train servers, we've got to train cooks, we've got to have equipment that works. So all the things that go into that one facility. But a lot of independent operators run one restaurant. But as we put several thousand together, we get layers of management. And anytime you start layering management, you begin to run into personality preferences that may not represent sound business reasoning. And I have seen it for years and years and years. People that get more senior, they move up in the organization, they think rank has its privileges. Yeah, you get the privilege to show up and wash dishes. As opposed to, well, wait a minute now, how long am I going to have to work night shifts, holidays, and weekends? Forever, as long as you're working. Because the business requires night shift supervision, holiday supervision, and weekend supervision. I've seen franchisees, as they make more money, and I'm not sure how to equate making more money with backing away from responsibility, but think, well, I shouldn't have to do that anymore. Well, if you're going to be the leader of the organization, which I am, but not really. I mean, I'm yesterday's leader, not today's leader. And but as long as I'm going to participate, I need to work night shifts, holidays, and weekends. And that'll never change. I had a lot of franchisees in our system throughout history that didn't like the fact that I did that, because sometimes I would show up in their restaurants, night shifts, holidays, and weekends. And they told me it embarrassed them. I said, well, I'm sorry that you embarrassed yourself. I didn't. I'm there to support the people. And so the whole keeping all this preference out of it, and that the business needs what it needs, and a leader's responsibility is, and that's the way we built our culture, is that we show up for the needs of the business, not go sit in an office someplace. Or if I wore a fancy suit in a restaurant, I'd have it ruined within an hour because I'd spill something on it.
Let's go back to your personal journey. So after business school, after the Air Force, did you always know you wanted to go into the family business? Or was there something where you knew it was kind of always an option, but you're not sure if it was your calling?
A lot of people think of it as the family business. There were 4 families involved in the Waffle House in the 60s. The largest percentage ownership was 37%. There was no one with majority control. It was not a Rogers family business. And when I gained control in 1978, there was no Rogers family. I was single. There was just me. That was an interesting transition. But everybody thinks it was a family business to begin with. It was not. It was a multifamily business that then shared ownership with others that were working there, because my dad thought that was important. Because where he had been at the Title House, they didn't share ownership past the original founding families. And he wanted to own part of what he worked for. And I understood that. But when I went off to business school, I thought I was going to go be an investment banker. and this business, okay, it would do okay. That would be fine. And the courses I studied in business school intrigued me about the business, what we mentioned out there in the hallway. I studied the debt capacity of the restaurant industry, high margins, growth industry, franchising, which is other people's money, depending on how you construct your franchise system, and said the inverse of that is you don't have to dilute the ownership. So I decided to come back and work in the business thinking we'd probably build it up for 10 years and sell it, because I knew there was no way I was going to be able to satisfy the wants or needs of those families. Wasn't going to work, because they would want the money and the toys and everything as opposed to the work. And they'd be glad to have me do the work.
Right.
And then take the spoils. And it was a total surprise to me.
Sure.
What unfolded after that.
Well, I'm sure there's a good book there somewhere, right?
Probably not.
For the reputation, brand, culture, and product, right? I spent my 16th birthday. My parents said I could go anywhere for dinner, and it was the Waffle House. Can you share why the Waffle House is provincial to the Southeast and just outside of the natural, organic growth that's happened over the past 40 years? But is there a reason that we're not in Cody, Wyoming, and some of the other places? And help us understand just the genesis of the growth pattern.
Well, in the Toddle House business, my dad worked in Memphis, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Memphis. And he thought that Atlanta in the Southeast, and he was from Jackson, Tennessee, where I was born as well, and he wanted to stay in the South, and he thought Atlanta was a better growth city and a more open city than the others he had worked in. So again, just a decision was made to start in Atlanta. We're very fortunate that we did, because the city has grown. The Southeast is a growth region. If we had started this business in North Dakota, would we have succeeded the way we have? Maybe not. Likely not. Now, in the 60s and 70s, we thought we were going to be a national restaurant chain. And in fact, the franchising and the development of the company restaurants was set up to be a national restaurant chain. And in 1979, I called a halt to that. We had expanded as far as Arizona with company units, and we were outrunning our supply lines of people. In our business, it's people. It's not food and can you build restaurants. It's people to operate those restaurants. And we weren't really happy with the quality of some of our earlier franchise efforts, and we needed to get control of that. So we stopped at about 24, 25 states, and then re-examined the idea of growth. And there were some West Coast chains that were expanding into the Southeast with 24-hour restaurants. Well, wait a minute. If they can build a 100-seat 24-hour restaurant, why can't we build another 33-seat 24-hour restaurant? So I said, why do I need to go to California? I didn't know that much about doing business in California, but I thought, why do we go out there and they're coming to our backyard? If they can compete effectively in our backyard, is that their fault or my fault? So we just rethought everything and said, let's fill in what we've got. And the more we do that, the better it works. So I don't know that we need to add any more geography for a long, long time to come. Now, there is always the possibility, if we become as popular as you think we probably ought to be, that the people in the other 25 states will move to the 25 states that we're in.
Well, it looks like it's happening, and COVID probably helped spark that too, right?
California exodus to Texas and Florida, that's Waffle House. That's not because of taxes. That's because of Waffle House. Think about it.
I think there's something to that. How do you like your hash browns?
Oh, scattered well.
Scattered well?
Yeah.
Same. I like a little pepper on there too. Peppered. So I've heard this theme continually of serving the people, making sure that everything is for the people, for the business. What drives the Waffle House organization today? And then also, what do you see over the next 30, 40 years for the Waffle House in the future?
Well, we're in the relationship business. Our associates and their relationship with our customers, our hourly associates do 99% of our customer contact work. Not me, not other people in senior or middle management. It's our hourly associates. We have relationships with our hourly associates. They're wonderful people. I've known so many of them for so many years. And I'm 74 years old. I don't need to work. I haven't needed to work probably since I was in my 30s. But what else are you going to do? And this is a worthwhile mission. And giving those people an opportunity to succeed, however they'd like to, and providing a continuing, enduring career opportunity for our hourly and management associates. We've got a division manager in Atlanta. What she told us the other day, she's got 30-something family members that work with us. And from time to time, people have said, well, Joe, you could sell that company. Yeah. I'd be yanking the rug out from a lot of people that have supported me for a lot of years. Now, why would I do that? To get some big number beside my name. I live well. Beyond living well, what is it? The next 10, 20, 30, or 40 years, the challenge for the next generation is, can they sustain the business, the culture, as long as calories are consumed on premise, and as long as relationships and service matter, so the business doesn't become obsolete, can they sustain it? It's all about sustaining the culture, which means you got to put aside some other temptations and care about the people more than you care about yourself.
Well, I'll never forget, I took my daughter, who's now 3, to the Waffle House for the first time for her visit, and one of the associates came up after we'd put the syrup on the waffle and butter, and she came up and she said she's about to have her first slice of heaven. And it was just one of those moments that I'll never forget, because that associate just really cemented that moment for me and my daughter and wife, and I feel like those moments are the things that is the intangible in the Waffle House, and it's back to that relationship that you're talking about.
It's funny, I get a lot of people sharing those kind of memories with me, which, if you think back that I started working when we had just 4 tiny restaurants, and not just how many we have today, but think about that journey in terms of number of customers over 50-something years, 60. I guess I started work 60 years ago next month. And how many customers have hopefully enjoyed, some maybe not, the Waffle House. I get told the good, the bad, and the ugly from time to time, but it's wonderful to hear those stories. And now they're becoming multi-generation stories. It's just like with our associates, and I'll walk in and a young associate will say, well, you know my grandmother, which makes me feel a little older. And yeah, you worked with my grandmother. And they'll tell, okay, where? Yeah, okay. And pretty soon it starts connecting. And that's pretty rare.
Yeah. Well, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but we always end the conversations with why Atlanta and what has Atlanta done for you. Want to touch on that just a touch more with, because on my biking ride out to Stone Mountain, I passed the original Waffle House, and it is, it's Atlanta to the core.
Well, see, as a kid in the 50s, I thought Atlanta was 2 towns away. I lived in Avondale Estates.
Yep.
You had to go through Decatur, which was a city, to get to Atlanta, which was a city. But then when Rich's department store opened their first suburban store at Belvedere, around the corner from me, right near Avondale High School, I said, oh, wait a minute, maybe we are part of Atlanta. And the fact that Avondale Estates is inside I-285. See, there was no I-285 back then. So the Atlanta region, are we an Atlanta company, really a metro Atlanta company, started in DeKalb County? It was no man's land then. It went in Avondale or Decatur. I think technically it's in Avondale Estates today, the original restaurant. But we're certainly a Georgia company for sure. Yeah. But the good news was here we are at the crossroads of growth. Georgia has grown. The Southeast has grown. Look at Florida. Look at the interstate highway system. There was no interstate highway system when we started. And yet pretty quickly in the 60s, we latched on to the interstate highway system as a growth opportunity. That's the reason we have those high-rise signs, and we actually changed the sign to that block letter sign. But Atlanta has also been an interesting culture experience. The slogans they have, a city too busy to hate, the leadership that we've had in Atlanta, the diversity that we've had in Atlanta. It's a melting pot. And it's not a closed society where you moved to another town years ago and maybe you couldn't get into the local club or do this or that. I hear those stories, but Atlanta was never that way. And transportation-wise, I mean, here we were thinking we were going to build a national company back in the 70s. That Atlanta airport was pretty darn important because we literally went to Dallas, Texas in 1972 to buy sites because on my clock radio, I woke up to 9 flights daily to Dallas on Delta. That was their theme that morning. And I'd hear that and say, well, I guess I better go to Dallas. It's easy to get there, but we were hemmed in by franchisees, so we had to leapfrog over Mississippi, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, basically, to say we need another beachhead for company-operated restaurants. So the whole unfolding of the system had a lot of back and forth. And as I said, I thought we were actually going to go west because OPEC struck in 1973. And after that energy crisis, it was going to be the Rust Belt up north and the Sun Belt out west. So we were going to go west.
Right.
And by the late 70s, OPEC struck again in 78. We looked up and said, wait a minute. The people didn't move. And what percentage of the U.S. population lives in a state that touches the Mississippi River or east of there? A huge proportion. So we stopped the western push and just started moving up into the Midwest. Worked out much better.
Makes sense. Joe, thank you so much for your time today. I feel like we could talk for 2 or 3 hours and that would still be not enough time. But I really appreciate all the stories and the learnings, and can't wait to get this one out.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by Atlanta Ventures. It was co-produced by JC Lucas and Jon Birdsong. If you are looking to start the next $300 million business in Atlanta, check out the studio at atlantaventures.com and the companies we work with who've done it before. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it at your next coffee meeting or dinner greeting, rate it, and write a benevolent, eloquent review.